She had spent 3 weeks building the most beautiful room in New Orleans, and she was going to watch her ex-boyfriend propose to someone else inside it. Eliza Merrow stood at the edge of the Fontaine Hotel's grand ballroom, the one she had personally overseen transforming from a blank marble shell into an evening of antique crystal chandeliers, walls draped in midnight velvet, centerpieces of white orchids arranged against gilded magnolia branches. As senior curator for Delacroix and Hale Fine Art, one of the most prestigious auction houses in the South, she had orchestrated hundreds of events like this: galas, private sales, donor dinners for museums that couldn't keep their endowments straight. She was extraordinarily good at making beautiful spaces for very important people. What she was considerably less good at was standing inside those spaces when Damien Forsythe walked in, wearing the same Cartier watch she had given him for his 32nd birthday. He looked exactly the same: sharply tailored navy suit, jaw that could cut glass, the kind of effortless confidence that came from never having been told his body was the problem. Beside him was a woman Eliza didn't recognize, slender in a champagne slip dress, laughing at something he murmured into her ear. His new fiancée, Corinne, the office gossip had said, a fashion consultant from Manhattan. Appropriately refined, the gossip had also said, and that word, appropriately, had sent Eliza straight to her kitchen, where she had stood over the sink, eating crackers directly from the sleeve, until she felt something other than what she was feeling. She turned to face the nearest orchid arrangement and pretended to assess it. She and Damien had been together for just over a year. He was an art dealer, flashy, well-connected, the kind of man who knew every gallery owner from New York to Geneva by their first name. She had been 30 at the time, recently promoted, doing exactly what she loved in the city she had spent a decade building a life in. He had told her, over oysters at Galatoire's on their 3rd date, that she was the most interesting woman he had ever taken to dinner. He had also told her, 14 months later, that he couldn't continue representing the image he needed to project to his European clients with a woman who, she was paraphrasing here, but not generously, looked the way she looked. He'd said it with the tone of a man identifying a logistical problem. Not cruel, exactly. Clinical, as if he had discovered an incompatible variable and was simply reporting his findings. She was a size 18. He had apparently considered that a deal-breaker he'd neglected to mention at the outset. Eliza, his voice close. She turned slowly, because she had made herself a promise in that parking garage 2 years ago, and the promise was this: he would never see her flinch. Damien. She kept her voice at the same temperature she used when a consignment piece turned out to be a forgery. Controlled, unrevealing. His eyes did the sweep, that quick, involuntary catalogue she remembered, before he arranged his face back into something collegial. I didn't realize you were running this event. I run most events of this caliber in the city. A beat, congratulations on the engagement. Something flickered across his expression. Not guilt, something closer to mild inconvenience. Yes, Corinne and I are thrilled. He stepped closer, lowering his voice the way people do when they want to pretend they're being kind. You look exhausted, Eliza. I mean that sincerely. Have you been sleeping? You know stress eating tends to show up in the face first. It might be worth addressing. The shame moved through her like hot water through a narrow pipe, fast, scalding, familiar. She had been stress eating. She knew it the way she knew the difference between an authentic Clementine Hunter and a copy. Immediately, without needing it explained. She didn't need him to explain it. She especially didn't need him to do it in a room full of the most significant collectors in Louisiana. That's a generous observation, she said, and her voice held. I just think if you took better care of. She looks fine to me. The voice came from behind Damien, and every curatorial instinct Eliza possessed. The ones that fired when something in a room demanded absolute attention, activated at once. The man who stepped forward was tall enough that Damien moved back by half a step without fully registering that he had done it. Dark suit, black, Not navy, not charcoal, the specific black of a man who had decided long ago to stop being approachable. His face was angular and controlled, the kind of face that had probably been conventionally handsome once and had since become something more severe. Dark hair, silver at the temples, a thin scar tracing the line of his jaw that a less self-assured man would have tried to conceal. She recognized him from the VIP acquisition registry, Lorenzo Vitale. New Orleans-born, currently Miami-based, publicly positioned as a real estate developer who occasionally purchased high-value art through private channels. Less publicly known to people who traded in a certain kind of information as the subject of a sustained federal organized crime investigation that had been running without success for nearly 4 years. She had not planned to speak to him tonight. She had not planned to do what she did next either. Damien turned to find himself looking up at Lorenzo by 4 full inches and attempted to recover his footing. "I don't believe we've been." "No," Lorenzo said, "we haven't." And then he looked past Damien entirely, directly at Eliza, with an expression she couldn't read, but that was completely, unnervingly deliberate. Damien was already scanning the room, looking for Corinne, or more likely calculating his audience, and the words came out of Eliza's mouth before her professional judgment could intervene. "He's here with me," she said, stepping forward and placing her hand on Lorenzo Vitale's arm. The fabric of his jacket was extraordinary, and his forearm went absolutely still beneath her fingers. "We arrived separately. I was just coming to find you." A beat of silence that felt geological in length. Damien looked between them. Lorenzo looked only at Eliza, with the careful stillness of someone making a decision. Then Lorenzo covered her hand with his, warm, unhurried, and said, "I've been looking for you as well." Damien departed with considerably less composure than he had arrived with. Lorenzo waited until he was well across the room before he looked at Eliza directly. "I owe you an enormous apology," she said immediately, her composure slightly frayed at the edges. "That was completely unprofessional, and I am not expecting anything from you in return." I panicked. "What is your name?" he asked. "Eliza Merrow, Senior Curator, Delacroix and Hale." "And that man?" "Damien Forsythe, art dealer, my former partner." Lorenzo held her gaze for a moment. "Then I have a proposition." She had not anticipated that, but she listened. He was concise about it, the manner of a man who had learned that unnecessary words created unnecessary exposure. The FBI had been building a financial case against his family's holding companies for the better part of 4 years. His attorney had advised that the most effective countermeasure was a visible shift in his public presentation. Not a bachelor's isolation, but the credibility of genuine civilian connection. A serious relationship with a woman of established professional standing, one who moved in legitimate circles, who had no criminal adjacency and every reason to be trusted. Eliza Merrow, who managed acquisitions and relationships with every major collector and cultural institution between New Orleans and Houston, satisfied every criterion. "You want to use my professional reputation as cover," she said. "I want to offer you something equal in return," he said. 3 months. I attend your events. You attend mine. I make it unambiguously clear to Damien Forsythe and to everyone in this city that you are not a woman who stands unaccompanied." He paused. "I am thorough when I make things clear." She thought about the parking garage. She thought about the word appropriately and the clinical tone in which it had been delivered and the 14 months of small excavations that had preceded it. She thought about the way Damien had looked at her 10 minutes ago, cataloguing her body the way he catalogued pieces. He had already decided to pass on. 3 months, she said. 3 months, he confirmed. After which we separate professionally, and this arrangement is never discussed. You have my word. She understood enough about men like Lorenzo Vitale to know that his word, in the right context, was a more binding instrument than most contracts. "All right," Eliza Merrow said, "deal." The next 72 hours rearranged several of her assumptions about what her life contained. She moved into the guest suite of his house in the Garden District, a restored Italianate mansion, the kind of building that got written up in preservation journals, with art on the walls that she catalogued involuntarily upon arrival. She had expected cold, executive luxury. What she found was a house that had been lived in, books with broken spines, a kitchen that smelled like coffee and fresh bread every morning, a terrace overlooking the garden where Lorenzo read the newspaper before 7 a.m., with the unhurried certainty of a man who owned his own schedule entirely. On the second morning, she came downstairs in what she privately called her work armor, a structured black blazer over a black blouse, chosen for exactly the same reasons she'd been choosing them for 15 years. Lorenzo looked up from the kitchen island and took her in with the measuring gaze she was beginning to recognize as his default mode. "You wear black every day," he said. "It's a classic. It's camouflage." She set her bag on the counter. "Excuse me?" "I've watched you move through this house for 2 days," he said, folding the paper. "You move like you're apologizing for occupying space. You dressed that entire ballroom at the Fontaine with complete authority. And then you walked through the door of that event in a coat 3 sizes larger than necessary." He looked at her directly. "Who taught you to make yourself smaller than you are?" The kitchen went very quiet. "That is a significant question for 8 in the morning," she said. "I ask them when I think of them." She held his gaze. 14 months with someone who suggested, regularly, that I might be easier to love at a different size. That tends to leave a mark. Something moved across Lorenzo Vitale's face that she had no name for. Then he picked up his phone. 2 hours later, a woman named Genevieve arrived with a rack from her boutique on Magazine Street. Structured, beautiful things in colors Eliza had trained herself not to reach for. Jewel tones, all of them. Deep teal, burgundy, a copper that caught the afternoon light like something from the collection rooms at the museum. Genevieve worked quickly and without commentary, the professional ease of someone accustomed to fitting women of all dimensions and finding what was correct for each one. Eliza put on a gown in deep burgundy with a fitted bodice, an off-the-shoulder line that felt more exposed than anything she had worn in years, and a draped skirt that gathered at her natural waist and fell in clean, deliberate lines to the floor. It fit the way well-made things fit when someone has measured correctly and not guessed. She stood in front of the tall mirror in the dressing room and felt something unfamiliar happen in her chest, a kind of pressure that wasn't anxiety. Lorenzo appeared in the doorway. He assessed the gown without ceremony. "That one," he said. "It's a considerable amount of dress. It's the accurate amount of dress." He crossed the room and stopped behind her, and in the mirror his eyes met hers with the same directness he applied to everything. "You have put a tremendous amount of energy into disappearing. I would like to suggest you stop. You are not someone who should disappear." He held her gaze in the glass. "Every person in the room will look at you, and they will not be able to explain why they cannot look away. You already know this. You have simply been told the opposite for long enough that you have started to believe it." Eliza did not say anything for a moment. "You're very direct," she finally managed. "It saves time," he said, and left her to the fitting. She wore the burgundy gown to the Museum of Art benefit that Friday. She had organized the seating chart herself 6 weeks prior, walking into the room on Lorenzo's arm, his hand steady at the small of her back, an anchor she hadn't known she needed. She watched the room shift the way rooms do when the energy changes. Heads turned, conversations paused mid-sentence. She found Damien Forsythe's face across the reception hall without trying. He was standing near the bar with Corinne, and he saw her, the gown, the jewelry Lorenzo had produced without explanation, the particular composure that comes from being looked at by someone who actually sees you, and then he saw the man beside her. His expression cycled through several stages before he settled on a smile that didn't reach anything above his upper lip. Eliza looked away first, because she wanted to, not because she had to. That distinction mattered. Damien Forsythe's engagement party was held at a private club in the warehouse district, in a space that Delacroix and Hale used for their spring previews, a choice Eliza could only read as deliberate. She arrived with Lorenzo in a car that she was now fairly certain was armored, wearing an off-shoulder gown in deep teal that Genevieve had delivered without being prompted, as though she had already known. Lorenzo had taken one look at her in the foyer of the Garden District house and said simply, yes, in the same unadorned tone he used to confirm wire transfers, which should not have been as gratifying as it was. The party was already dense when they arrived. Damien was holding court near the champagne display. She clocked him in the first 30 seconds, and she watched the precise moment he registered their entrance. His face did the same thing it had done at the museum benefit, but slower this time, because Corinne was watching him and the recovery required more effort. Lorenzo moved her through the room with a hand at her back, greeting specific people with the fluency of someone who had attended every significant gathering in this city for 2 decades. He introduced her without hesitation, Eliza, my partner, and she felt, for the first time in as long as she could accurately recall, that the introduction required no qualifier. They were 40 minutes in when Damien found her at the sidebar. I have to admit, he began, with the careful warmth of someone who had been drinking since 6 and was managing it imperfectly. You look wonderful tonight, Eliza. I mean it. Though, his eyes did the inventory, the old reflex, the assessment she had once believed she deserved. A man like Vitale with someone like you, I give it a month before he figures out the math. You know how these things go. The familiar shame rose in her throat, but beneath it now was something else. Something that had been accumulating for 3 weeks in a Garden District house, constructed conversation by a man who asked difficult questions at 8 in the morning and stood behind her in mirrors and said, "You are not someone who should disappear." She opened her mouth. She didn't need to finish. Lorenzo was there. She hadn't seen him cross the room, but he was there, and Damien stepped back without intending to. Lorenzo did not raise his voice. He didn't touch Damien with anything approaching aggression. He simply stood at Eliza's side and said, in the same tone she had heard him use on a phone call that had ended with 3 people losing their equity stakes, "You are going to apologize to her now, in front of whoever is close enough to hear you, and then you are going to remain on the opposite side of this room for the rest of the evening. You have no idea who you're speaking to." "I know exactly who I am speaking to," Lorenzo said with infinite patience. "A man with a great deal to lose and very little time left to understand that. Apologize." The silence stretched. Damien's jaw tightened. His fiancée was 20 feet away. His European clients were at this party. Lorenzo Vitale was looking at him with the complete stillness of someone who was not going to repeat himself. "I'm sorry, Eliza," Damien said tightly, quietly. Lorenzo nodded once. He put a hand on Eliza's arm and guided her toward the dance floor with the unhurried authority of a man who had decided what happened next in every room he occupied. She was still processing it when the sound came. 2 sharp cracks from the direction of the main entrance. Not a bang, something more precise, and then a third, and then the champagne display on the left wall simply ceased to exist in a spray of glass and foam. Someone screamed, and then everyone was screaming, and the room became a chaos of overturned chairs and running guests. Eliza understood gunfire approximately 2 seconds before Lorenzo's arm came across her, sweeping her behind him, and a firearm appeared in his right hand from somewhere inside his jacket with a speed that confirmed he had carried it all evening and had prepared for exactly this possibility. "Stay behind me," he said, "Quabsolute." He moved through the panicking crowd with her shielded against his back, his head up and tracking, reading the room the way she read auction floors, total situational awareness, nothing missed. A large man she vaguely placed, from Lorenzo's security detail materialized from the chaos and fell into position. "Bruno," Lorenzo said. "Two down at the entrance," the man said without breaking stride. "Third one unaccounted. Cars on Commerce. Get her to the car. I'm right behind you." "Lorenzo." "Go." He looked at her for half a second. In those half seconds she had begun to understand him. The controlled face, the measured voice, but what passed across his features now was something that didn't fit either category, something raw and brief and immediately suppressed. "I will be 30 seconds behind you. Go." Bruno got her to the car. Lorenzo was precisely 30 seconds behind them. His jacket was gone. His left hand was pressed against his right side in a way that told her what had happened before she could ask. "You're shot," she said. "Grazed," he said. "Those are the same thing." "I can assure you they are not." She didn't argue because she was already pulling the sash from her teal gown. Genevieve was going to have several things to say about this, and pressing it against his ribs with both hands, steady and firm, the way she handled irreplaceable things. He hissed once, quietly, which she had come to understand was considerable for him. They drove north through the city. Eliza sat in the armored interior with her ruined gown, and her hands pressed to the wound of a man she had known for 23 days, and felt something in the region of her chest behaving in ways she did not have adequate language for. The safe house in Metairie had a medical room that she noted and chose not to examine too closely. A doctor arrived, worked on Lorenzo's side with brisk professionalism, and politely asked Eliza to wait outside. She declined. When the doctor left, Lorenzo sat on the edge of a clean bed in a black t-shirt that had replaced his destroyed shirt, a neat bandage along his left side. The room was very quiet. He watched her the way he had been watching her. She now recognized, since that first night at the Fontaine. Bruno pulled the security footage from the venue, he said, 45 minutes before the shooting. Damien Forsythe exited through a side door and made an 11-minute phone call. Eliza went still. "The Coretti family has been contesting my freight operations along the Gulf for 2 years, Lorenzo said evenly. They would have paid well for confirmed attendance at a private event with relaxed security. Forsythe would have known who I was the moment you touched my arm at that first gala. He had enough connections to know who to call." His voice was a statement of fact, nothing more inflected. "He put you in the room, Eliza. He knew exactly where you would be standing." She thought about the parking garage. She thought about appropriately. She thought about the way he had looked at her 3 hours ago, still cataloguing, still finding her insufficient, still convinced even now, even with everything, that he had the right. That was the last time. Something settled in her, final and clean, like a piece placed correctly in a frame. "What happens to the Corettis?" she asked. "A separate conversation." He held her gaze. "To Forsythe, his art-dealing operation has been under a parallel financial investigation for 18 months. Money laundering, primarily. My attorney will be providing the investigative team with documentation that accelerates their timeline. His gallery licenses will be suspended by the end of the week. His European partnerships will close quietly over the month that follows." He paused. "He will not be conducting business in this city again." "You did that for me," she said. "He sold my location to a rival organization to manage his bruised ego," Lorenzo said. "And yes, for you." The room was quiet for a long moment. She looked at this man she had grabbed out of blind panic and found, in the weeks between, to be the most uncomplicatedly honest presence in her orbit. He had never once told her she was fine. He told her she was accurate. He told her she was right. He told her, without any ceremony, that she was magnificent and should let the room look and let them wonder. "The 3 months," she said. "We're not even at 7 weeks." "I know." The arrangement was supposed to be temporary, practical. "I'm aware of what the arrangement was supposed to be." He reached for her hand, slowly, and held it with both of his. "What I need to understand is whether you are still operating under those terms. Because I have not been, not for some time. She looked at their hands. She thought about all the things she had spent 2 years telling herself about the kinds of men who would look at her, actually look at her, without the inventory, without the assessment, and how she had, gradually, stopped believing any of them would. I think I stopped being practical about this some time ago, she said, which was the most honest thing she had said in months. Good, he said, because I have something to ask you. From the pocket of his discarded jacket, retrieved by Bruno at some point she hadn't tracked, he produced a ring she recognized immediately, with the specific recognition of someone who had written its provenance description herself. Late Art Deco, platinum setting, old European cut diamond of approximately 4 carats, acquired from a Paris estate sale. It had come through Delacroix and Hale's private acquisitions department 8 weeks ago. You bought this from my auction house, she said. 2 weeks after we met, he said, which I acknowledge was presumptuous. She laughed, a real one, the kind that came up without warning and escaped before she could edit it, the kind she hadn't done in front of another person in longer than she could accurately measure. That is genuinely high-handed, she said. Yes, he agreed, entirely without apology. Lorenzo, you planned this. I plan things, he said. It is a consistent feature of my character. He held out the ring. Eliza, I want you to stay, not for 3 months, not under any arrangement with an end date. As my wife, if you're willing, and as my partner in every sense of the word that actually means something. His voice, always controlled, carried something underneath it now that she recognized because she had been feeling it herself for weeks, running just below the surface of every carefully maintained professional boundary. You are the most remarkable person I have encountered in a life that has not been short on remarkable things. I am not interested in pretending otherwise, or in giving you any further opportunity to pretend you haven't noticed. She looked at the ring. She thought about parking garages and black blazers and the word appropriately and burgundy silk and a man who said yes like a mathematical confirmation. She thought about standing in a mirror and feeling for the first time in years that she did not need to explain herself to the reflection. She thought about Damien Forsythe, who would be meeting with federal investigators before the week was out, whose gallery licenses would be suspended, whose European network would close its doors one by one, who had managed, in one last act of small vindictive cowardice, to accelerate his own complete undoing. She held out her hand. I want the record to show that you bought this before asking me, she said. The record will reflect exactly that, Lorenzo Vitale said, and slid the ring onto her finger with the same careful deliberateness he brought to everything that mattered. The federal investigation into the Vitale family's holdings closed 6 months later, citing insufficient evidence. Damien Forsythe's gallery empire collapsed in a fraud prosecution that occupied the Times-Picayune's front page for 4 consecutive days, the photographs of him in handcuffs outside his warehouse district office circulating widely on local news cycles. His European clients issued statements. His fiancée did not. Eliza Merrow Vitale returned to work at Delacroix and Hale the following Monday, in a deep copper dress that Genevieve had chosen without being asked, and moved through the acquisition rooms and the gallery floors, and the client meetings, with the unhurried authority of a woman who had stopped apologizing for the space she occupied. The city noticed, cities always do. She was magnificent, and Lorenzo Vitale had made certain, in the methodical and absolute manner of a man who kept his word, that no one who mattered would ever fail to understand it.